Welcome back to the channel. You know that it is time now to take a look at your latest industry developments. Today there is coverage on JetBlue axing flights, developments at Virgin Australia, and some big network expansion occurring at Turkish Airlines. I'll begin with the latter, being Turkish Airlines finally announcing it'll launch service to Australia, and it's selected Melbourne as its first destination. From March 16, 2024, the first flight will arrive in Melbourne, Australia, with a thrice weekly service being offered initially by the 7879 Dreamliner. Turkish Airlines will operate service from Melbourne on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. This will then, however, shift towards Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Flights towards Australia, you may recall, have been a long time in the making, as the company looks towards massively expanding its overall reach and becoming a leading global carrier. As part of these ambitious targets, the airline will increase its fleet substantially, while also looking to expand into existing and new markets. And you could generally say that launching service to Australia is really the first steps in a broader goal for the company. Turkish Airlines also choosing Melbourne is pretty significant for the state of Victoria. There was a lot of discussion around where they would initially choose to fly, whether that be Sydney or Melbourne. However, onlookers always saw Melbourne as the most logical choice, as it is home to the largest Turkish community in the country. And on top of that, Melbourne can be seen as the country's sporting capital, with the Australian Open currently taking place, the AFL Grand Final, Formula One, among other significant events. And obviously, I live in Melbourne, Australia, so seeing this airline come to my home is fantastic to say the least. The airline, however, is with time and permitting results in the city, looking at launching service towards Sydney too. However, the delivery of new aircraft will make only this possible. At the moment, it is not feasible. So if all goes according to plan, you could expect in, say, even 5 years' time, the airline to be flying towards both Sydney and Melbourne daily as well. As I have been saying throughout this segment, launching flights to Australia is going to be really critical in helping the airline build for the long term. Now it also is a new means to connect to Europe for Australians, not just those in Melbourne, but also neighbouring cities, as we know a lot of people will travel to other Australian cities to connect onwards. I use Air Canada as a perfect example. They do not fly into Melbourne, so whenever I have to personally make the journey over there and Air Canada offer up some of the lowest fares, I have to either travel to Sydney or Brisbane to connect onwards, and you may find that those trying to travel to Turkey or Europe will also make a similar trek down south. Interestingly, for the moment, service will be operated through Singapore Changi, so essentially as a triangular route, and while I have touched on it being thrice weekly, the overall plan is to bump this up to daily. Additionally, the airline will therefore then plan to remove the Singapore Changi stopover and just fly non-stop from Istanbul to Melbourne. But again, in a very similar fashion to launching to Sydney, this can only be done when more aircraft are delivered. And you'd argue that once this happens, there will be significant competition now for existing Middle Eastern carriers and even Qantas, who offer service towards Europe from Melbourne. You can let me know your thoughts down below in the comments on this new route announcement and whether you believe it is big for the Australian aviation industry as we begin welcoming more and more airlines to the country. Sticking in Australia, and Virgin Australia has announced that it's expanding its regional network by signing a partnership with Link Airways, a pretty small company that, depending on where you're tuning in from, you may not have actually heard of. In what can be described as a new era but also new focus for the Australian company, the airline has really targeted Link Airways to enhance its regional footprint tenfold. Thanks to the new partnership, more than 90 services per week will essentially have the Virgin Australia name alongside it, thanks to the codeshare agreement. A key location, such as Wollongong and more, will be included in the newly launched partnership. Locations such as what I've touched on, including more, can be deemed as very important for Virgin Australia through this new partnership, and you may be asking why. Well, based on the Link Airways route network, a lot of these locations are not served by any other major Australian carrier, and also from the ports of departure. So if Virgin Australia can add their name to these services, they believe they're offering customers a new opportunity. The regional carrier that I speak of actually only has a fleet of 14 aircraft. However, over time, it has risen through the ranks of the Australian aviation market, with regional offerings that are really providing compelling options for customers that need adequate travel. Virgin Australia says the partnership will focus also on benefits for Velocity Frequent Flyer members, which is now almost at 12 million users. Aboard Link Airways operated services that the carrier code shares on, passengers will be eligible to earn both points and status cards. So obviously for those of you that are tuning in that love that kind of travel world when it comes to collecting points, you will see positive repercussions from jumping on a Link Airways service. Virgin Australia says the regional routes that they do plan to code share on will be extensive, and Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra will all feature. On your screen now are the return services that Virgin Australia will code share on with Link Airways. You can see Brisbane brings up the bulk of these, however there are a few coming from Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra too. On to the final story in today's proceedings at least, and that is with JetBlue, who following a merger rejection with Spirit Airlines are making several changes to their route network following a report issued by CNBC. As part of the network reshuffle, the airline will adjust flying from New York John F. Kennedy International Airport to Portland, San Jose, Westchester, and Martha's Vineyard. This is because an executive who penned a note to staff said that flying everywhere is impossible. The schedule must be adjusted to ensure the company's long-term future. Additionally, an important focus really must be placed on being selective about where these aircraft are going to operate, because we know this is vital to ensure a stable operation. On top of the previously announced routes slated to be axed, the airline will also suspend flights from New York to a location in Puerto Rico and Milwaukee from October 2024. According to the memo, which was seen by CNBC, leisure routes will become a core focus of the latest adjustments. So as a result, we'll see service towards destinations in the Caribbean and Paris increased. This will really be where their focus goes. Route cuts come only following the official rejection and termination plans from a judge's ruling of JetBlue's planned merger with Spirit Airlines, but the company does say that the latest route adjustment doesn't come because of these repercussions, and it's just a natural part of being an airline. Being an airline means that changes to a route network will always be required. The airline believes that the service adjustments will aid them in offering a more robust schedule in the future, and one that is also more reliable for their customers. Onlookers do remain very hesitant about the future outlook for JetBlue now this merger is being rejected. I think it's definitely going to pose some very interesting questions about just how JetBlue and also Spirit will navigate the future. You can let me know your thoughts down below in the comments on any of the topics covered in today's proceedings. I really do appreciate your support here on the channel. Thanks a lot, take care, be safe, and I will see you next time.